I'm going to skim through my address as quickly as possible to make sure that there's some time for Q&A. So if you do have any more in-depth technical questions, please go ahead, but that's why I'm going to be skimming over the techie stuff and trying to concentrate on the things that would be most interesting and relevant to you. So as you know, during the past couple of centuries, telecommunications engineers and physicists and mathematicians have fundamentally changed the way that we all relate to each other. These frontiers of scientific endeavours have increased the frequency and the quality and the accessibility of all human connection. And I'm sure you'd all know here, but what defines us as individuals are our relationships with each other. And it's telecommunications and broadband that really removes these limits to human connections. And be these connections between the people in Libya and Tunisia, Iran, Egypt and Syria who are seeking democracy. And most relevant to you here today, connections between buyers and sellers, between authors and readers, between composers and listeners, developers and gamers, designers and publishers and producers, and publishers and consumers. When the NBN, or the National Broadband Network, is deployed across Australia in the coming decade, we may also see things like an autistic child at home communicating with a developmental paediatrician using interactive high-definition video. And we may see all premises in Australia connected with power utilities and magnifying the carbon abatement opportunities with demand-side energy management. But before we all get too excited about the possibilities, the point of today is to explain the National Broadband Network's journey to date, what the NBN plans to deliver, and changes in how COW's membership and all of you here and everyone else listening on the web can choose their providers, access and distribute content. Just to give you some context, Australia's enjoyed 3 major phases of publicly funded telecommunications infrastructure deployment. What you can see on the slide behind me is the first phase, which was the Overland Telegraph, a 3-kilometre line which was built in less than 2 years and completed in 1872. The second major phase was just at the end of World War II, with the rollout of the Customer Access Network. More than 60 years later, here we are at the beginning of the third deployment of major telecommunications infrastructure, the NBN, which is a wholesale-only communications network designed to deliver high-speed broadband to all Australia. So why are we doing this? Well, in a nutshell, the Australian government back in 1997 ushered in an era of telecommunications facilities-based competition. But the market structure that emerged did not deliver the full benefits of competition that policymakers had hoped for. So enter NBN, a government business enterprise charged with building a ubiquitous network, delivering a cross-subsidised model to fundamentally address an infrastructure upgrade in Australia. And this is wholesale only. As I'm sure you'd all know, this upgrade is critical because data usage is exploding and the copper access network simply can't cope. Furthermore, the mobile operators around the world will attest there is a drive to take mobile data off the towers and onto the fixed network. In terms of speed, the requirement has grown about 4,000 times over the last 20 years. And as you'll see from the left-hand axes, these actual numbers are going up exponentially. So the actual curve, if you charted it in a really big piece of paper, would look something like that. And Australia's existing copper infrastructure is coming to the ends of its limits, and we have to do something to address it. The NBN will deliver a once-in-a-generation upgrade of the nation's telecommunications infrastructure and resolve these bottlenecks, which has seen us fall quite seriously behind our peers. And I was just talking to someone earlier in the afternoon tea break, and they were giving some examples of living overseas and coming to Australia and saying, wow, things are really behind the 8 ball here. So the NBN is going to enable peak speeds of at least 12 megabits per second using a nationwide network of fibre, fixed wireless and satellite technologies. With the fibre product, we expect to cover 93% of Australian premises, initially offering speeds of 100 megabits per second over fibre, rising to 1 gigabit per second next year, with capacity for further upgrades in the future. The NBN Co will engineer its wireless and long-term satellite products to cover the remaining 7% of premises, to provide Australia with a peak speeds of at least 12 megabits per second. We'll also be offering an interim satellite solution, which will be giving people faster speeds than they experience now on their current existing satellite services. So the NBN has 5 key features worth exploring, and I'll skim over this, but if you've got any questions, please ask me. Ubiquity, which is obvious because we're going to be covering 100% of Australian premises. Now, this is all businesses, all schools, hospitals and homes. This is not an insubstantial task and will take close to a decade to do. The NBN will also be wholesale only. and that means we'll be facilitating a restructure of the Australian telecommunications industry by creating a wholesale-only network obliged to treat all access seekers on a non-discriminatory basis. This will deliver a level playing field on which retail service providers can compete and innovate. We'll also be delivering uniform national wholesale pricing across the network, and we're being very transparent about our pricing. We have two sections. One is access pricing, which is looking after the piece that goes to the home, and the other piece is the connectivity link, which is the capacity shared between many access links. And obviously, as you can see, the downstream from 12 going to 1,000 and the upstream going from 1 to 400 is a very different environment to the one we currently have ourselves in. Now, the physical boxes that we'll be installing in people's homes and businesses, known as network terminating devices, or NTDs, has 4 ports for data, which means that we have up to 4 service providers of data applications in the one premise. So you have potentially 4 retail service providers, or ISPs, all providing services into the one premise. There will also be 2 voice ports, or what they call in tech speak, analog telephone adapters, or ATAs, which means that people can literally take their phone out of their current socket and put it into the network terminating device, or the NBN box, as it'll be, to basically migrate their services from a copper-based network to a fibre-based network. Now, the other key element of NBN is continuous improvement, because unlike a bridge, which just is a one-off exercise, the NBN can be used before the entire structure is finished. What's more, we can continually improve as we go, and that means identifying new ways to maximise efficiency and reduce costs. And in order for us to find out ways to do that, we've begun trial sites in Tasmania, in 3 towns of Midway Point, Smithton and Scottsdale. We've had some terrific stories from those 3 towns to date. And there's 2 in particular that I think you may find relevant. One is the digital animation studio, and the other one is a sign writer. And we are just at the beginning of collecting stories of how people have found their worlds before an NBN and after an NBN, and the differences that it's made. Because we've found that in communicating this to people, and we are the wholesale provider, people aren't actually buying, all of you won't be buying services off the NBN, they'll be buying it from retail service providers. However, in explaining what it is and what it's all about, it's the stories that people have of how their experience has been, which we've found to be the most compelling and the ones that really make sense to people. So in Tasmania, we've started the ball rolling with 3 of our pre-release trial sites, and then on the mainland here in Australia, we have 5 sites, which we've been also doing first release sites, and last week you may have heard on the news, we launched the site in Armidale. We also have the towns of Brunswick, the suburb of Brunswick, I should say, Townsville in Queensland, Kiama here in New South Wales, and Wollonga in South Australia. And the reason these places were chosen because they represent some very diverse geography, some climates, the housing types, the demographics, and the density of housing that NBN expects to encounter during the volume rollout. And this is really important because it means that we capture a whole lot of really important learnings about whether you bore in a certain angle and a certain width and all of the construction logistics, but we also have a whole lot of learnings we can take away with how we engage with the community, how we explain what's going on, how we say, yes, your rose garden may be dug up, but this is how we're going to put it all back together, and all of those complicated things. The final thing is the financial viability of the network, and just to give you the top line numbers, the NBN entire cost will be approximately $36 billion. It'll employ around 15,000 people and take about a decade to complete. Over the lifetime of the project, we expect to connect almost 11 million premises, plus another 2 million premises, which will be built over the lifetime of this product. So we expect to return about 7% in terms of taxpayers' money without considering any additional benefits. And in terms of if you're going to contextualise the spend of what we as a nation will be spending on NBN, NBN will cost less than the value of the tax cuts delivered over the past 3 years, just to contextualise that. And some recent OECD studies have found that you only need a cost saving of between 0.5% and 1.5% in the 4 sectors of health, education, electricity and transport over 10 years alone to justify the cost of building the NBN.